bought buses that look like trains. They look just like a train, man. You can't tell, but it's a bus. And they're starting something called bus rapid transit. So instead of having to spend 10 years building rail lines that can never move, they're doing like what Curitiba does in South America and other big countries down there, focusing on buses that run like trains on fixed,
Hmm.
dedicated guideways, and you can ride them, and you don't even have to worry about a schedule. You don't have to look at a schedule and say, "Oh, when's the next one?" Because they come every 3 to 5 minutes. So you just come out and you stand there. So that's what they're going to do in Brisbane, and I love it. That's what we should be doing here in America.
Welcome to another episode of World Travel Made Easy with Itinerary Boss. And on today's episode, I'm excited to welcome Paul Comfort. I got the chance to connect with Paul over email, and he had reached out just around how he can provide some value around his TV show, Transit Unplugged. And don't want to sell him short, but really excited to have him on because he'll bring a lot of different insights into food, culture, and travel through public transportation. So, how's it going, Paul?
Good, Ross. Great to be on your show, man.
Yeah, yeah. Appreciate you hopping on. And I know you just got back from a little work slash vacation. Would love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, just got back from 2 weeks in Australia, and it was great. I live near Annapolis, Maryland, and I visited there once before the pandemic, but it was great to do it again. We visited Melbourne, Tasmania. Hobart is the capital of Tasmania, which is a state, like an island just south of Australia. Pretty cool. I've always watched the Bugs Bunny show when I was a kid and wanted to see a Tasmanian devil, which I got to see eventually. I'll tell you about it later. And then we went to Brisbane and the Gold Coast and the Sun Coast beaches to Miami, Australia, which looks just like Miami, Florida, man. Amazing. We were there. I was there for work, as you mentioned. I'm the senior vice president of a company called Medaxo, which is one of the world's largest transportation technology companies. And I was visiting with our company there, our offices, our staff, speaking with them. Also spoke at a bus conference called BIC and a rail conference called Rail. My background is public transportation. And uh, then I also filmed 2 episodes of our TV show, which you mentioned in your opening, Transit Unplugged TV, which is on YouTube. And now, I think since the last time we've talked, actually, it's been picked up by MSN. So they're now putting our show, our TV show on Microsoft Network and also on the Transportation Channel, streaming on that cable network here in the US. So, so I recorded a couple episodes of that show. Basically, our show features the food, fun, and culture of a city or a region, and then we show you behind the scenes of their public transportation system and how to use it to get around that area. So that kind of makes us unique. And did some great, jet skiing. Noosa, man, to me, Ross, I don't know if you've been there, but Noosa was the cream of the crop. I mean, Melbourne's got amazing coffee, right? I mean, they're the coffee capital of the world. I had 2 or 3 different types of coffee every day I was there for 3 or 4 days. I also helped oversee. There's a college there, a big university called Monash University, and a friend of mine's a professor there who heads up their transportation program, Graham Curry, and so he had me help participate in a global transportation games program where these planners plan out routes for cities. Um, but Melbourne was great. I love Melbourne. It's definitely one of the 7 most livable cities. They've got the world's largest tram network, which is light rail, called Yara Trams. I got to ride that a lot and feature that on the show, talk to some of the leaders. Um, the Tasmania is like the southernmost part of the country. It's actually pretty close, like to Antarctica. So the Antarctic ships get to resupply there. We were at the harbor, and ships were coming in, getting their resupplies for science camps down there, whatever they've got going on in Antarctica. And it's very rugged. It reminds me of Alaska. Mountainous. We went up on this big mountain called Mount Wellington. They have some great vineyards there, cool weather wines, and a friend of ours that was there who was kind of hosting us, her sister lived on the island. So she took us all around in a four-wheel drive vehicle, all these back roads, and showed us the Tasmania, like the locals experience it. That was cool. And then we went to Brisbane, which I'd never been to before. It's up further up toward the equator, so it's warmer there. The wild thing about Australia is their seasons are exactly the opposite of ours. So they're going into summer. We're going into winter here on the east coast of the U.S. And so especially in Brisbane and that area, it was warm. 70s and 80s Fahrenheit. But we did a lot of fun stuff for the show. We went to Steve Irwin's Australia Zoo. His family still runs it. They, have a crocodile show there, and man, it's the coolest thing. I wanted to, I wanted to see a Tasmanian devil, so I got to see one there. They had it all around, so it looks like a rat with a dog's face, kind of is the way I visualize it. Nothing like what's on Bugs Bunny. It doesn't look
Yeah.
like that, but pretty wild. You couldn't touch those. But then I was totally blown away by this. They had big open field. We walked out there, Ross, and they had little. I don't know if they're babies or just small, but kangaroos everywhere, and you could just go up and play with them, touch them, pet them, feed them, lay down on the ground, rub their belly. They're like little dogs. Like I've got a little Shih Tzu dog, and kind of reminded me of a bigger version of that. Just very lovable, amazing. That we always visualize them as mean. If you get into a
Yeah.
boxing match, they'll punch you. Maybe the older ones are, but or the bigger ones are, but these guys were just beautiful, like beautiful little kids, little Joeys, I guess they call them. And then I got to pet a koala bear. They had them there, and you could the back of your hand. They wanted you to, do
Yeah.
like this to them. But so that was a real fun experience. We don't get to see those kind of animals up close in person here in the U.S. So it's great. They got a great life in Australia. Very. It's just a different vibe. And there's a
Yeah.
beach there called Noosa, which we went to, and it's very like a laid back vibe. And then there is the Gold Coast, that's on the Sunshine Coast. And then you go below it, and there's the Gold Coast, and that's more of an upscale, like Miami, vibe where everybody's dressed to the nines, and it's very upscale. Whereas the others much more. I don't even know how you would describe it. I'm trying to think of a place here in America it was like that, but it's very a relaxed beach vibe, which I really dug. We loved it there.
Yeah, yeah, no, it sounds like an awesome trip. I have not been yet, and I have friends who've gone and they've raved about it. So when I do go, that's a top three on the list to go to
Yeah, put it on
next.
your list, man.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%. That's yeah, that South Africa. I know we're going over to Asia in April. But yeah, that's definitely on the top of the list. And yeah, Tasmanian Devil, you took the words out of my mouth. The first thing I was thinking of is Space Jam, right
That's
when
right. Yeah, exactly,
and
man.
yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm glad you had a good trip, and I thought it was really interesting, and this is exciting. I know when we talked prior, you had said you've gone on a ton of transportation podcasts, right? That's what I mean,
Right.
SVP at a company, you eat, breathe, sleep that transportation, but travel podcast, you hadn't been on one yet, and for me, it's pretty cool when you had reached out because it's just a different side and learning for me
Yeah.
of what goes on behind the scenes all over different in the world. So I think just understanding how did you just to start, like how did you get into public transportation and transit?
Yeah. So I've been doing this for more than 30 years. So as I mentioned, I live in Maryland, and I wanted to get involved in politics and government. I felt I don't know why, just from a kid, I got super. What really got me interested is watching when I was 12 years old. My parents, we were going down to Disney World for a vacation, and I remember we stopped at a Holiday Inn hotel, and I was probably 11 or 12 years old. And the 1976 political convention was on, the Republican National Convention, and Ronald Reagan was trying to take on Jerry Ford. Remember, because and Jimmy Carter ended up winning that election, and Ford, and I just remember all this. There was a big controversy over did the Reagan people unplug the red Ford phone? It was like a movie, man. And I remember laying in bed there. We're in a hotel room with two queen beds. My mom and dad are in one, my brother and I in the other. We sat there and watched this thing, and it just looked fascinating to me. And then later on, my parents got involved some politically as well, and so I got interested in government politics. I ran for county commissioner when I was 21. America has 3,000 counties. It's our primary form of structure of local government. It's really where the rubber hits the road, literally. It's where your local schools are and your parks and planning and zoning and all that stuff. So I wanted to get involved here in my home county, Queen Anne's County. When I was 21, I was going to University of Maryland, and I didn't win, but I won for Central Committee, which is like a political party office. But after I ran, man, a guy that was running for office too, we both lost. He called me after and said, you're a really sharp young man. Would you be interested in coming to work for the Department of Aging in the county? And I was like, yeah, that'd be great. I wanted a good job in government. And when you graduate, I was getting a history degree, and I knew I wasn't going to like teach history or anything. I just loved history, so I figured
Yeah.
I'll get a job. I'm not worried about getting a job. Um, so he did. He said, "What do you want to do? You want to run the senior centers, or you want to, I have a new job called a transportation coordinator. We have enough vans where we now need somebody to actually manage them. And I got a 1 year grant. I can pay for your salary for 1 year for sure. And I think we'll get it next year. And I said, well, I don't know. Which one do you think I should do? I got no idea. He said, why don't you try the transportation one? It's new, and you got a lot of energy. So 35 years later, here I am.
That's awesome. I mean, I love hearing stories about that and just, just how it got started, why, and that, you kind of took a risk of you could have gone a different path and you were just like, no, let's see what happens. You got a degree in something completely different, right? And then you're just like, hey, I like history, I'll go figure it out. And then now you're pairing something that you did right out of school with then your love for history and traveling around and seeing food, culture, art. That's pretty cool. Those are some of my favorite things about doing this podcast is hearing the background stories of the why and how did it all
Yeah.
get to this point.
I've always tried to work. The other two things I love, music, media, and politics are my three passions. And I think that's important for people, just as a side note. If you don't really know what you love, what your interests are, you should take some time to really think it through. There's a book called Strength Finder that's really good at doing that. There's plenty of books that do that, but figuring out what you're really interested in and then figuring out what you're really good at, not what your mom says you're good at, because your mom thinks you're good at everything, but what you really, like on Seinfeld, oh, Jerry,
Yeah.
how can anyone not love you? But my favorite show, but what you're really good at and where those two intersect, Ross, I believe that's your destiny. I believe that your destiny is written by your abilities and your interests. And when you can find where they intersect, that's where you self actualize. That's where you become the best you, back to college, right? Maslow's hierarchy. We all studied that in college of needs. And so I always tried to work in music, media, and politics. I played piano. I had a band in college. We made a record and toured around. I wrote most of the songs, and that's why we didn't do much because we didn't do a lot of cover tunes. That's what people want to hear. And then, so like my first job, I used to play piano in the senior centers for the seniors at holidays and lead holiday sing-alongs and take them on trips on the van, to go see, some sites that they were going to go see, some Broadway show or whatever. So I worked in the travel and the music and the media. So I got involved with media locally and was writing for newspapers and had a radio show on a local radio station for 16 years when I was in my late teens and 20s, a talk show called Comfort's Corner. And, I didn't get paid much. I got paid maybe, I think it was $25 a week. I wasn't doing it for the money. I was doing it because it
Yeah.
was fun. I loved it, right? So that was my passions all coming together. And so that's what I've done here. I've gone through 30 years in the industry, was CEO of the MTA in Baltimore, the 11th largest transit system in America, had $1 billion budget, 5,000 employees, and then kind of retired and left active management of transit, which I had done for many years and got to work for this company. And they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to write, I want to speak, I want to travel, and I want to help my fellow CEOs improve their transit systems. So I started out with an audio podcast where it interviews CEOs around the world called Transit Unplugged. It's now #1 in the world, heard in 100 countries for transit. And it's a half-hour interview show where I interview a different executive every week about, best trends, what's happening, what's going on with autonomous vehicles, cybersecurity. Are you like when I was in Brisbane, they're doing something really cool. They bought buses that look like trains. They look just like a train, man. You can't tell, but it's a bus. And they're starting something called bus rapid transit. So instead of having to spend 10 years building rail lines that can never move, they're doing like what Curitiba does in South America and other big countries down there, focusing on buses that run like trains on fixed,
Hmm.
dedicated guideways, and you can ride them, and you don't even have to worry about a schedule. You don't have to look at a schedule and say, "Oh, when's the next one?" Because they come every 3 to 5 minutes. So you just come out and you stand there. So that's what they're going to do in Brisbane, and I love it. That's what we should be doing here in America. I
Yeah.
think more of that. We've got some of it, but we're doing more of it. So anyway, and then after the pandemic, I wanted to wanted to start traveling some more, and I knew people wanted to travel, and that's all. I thought that's the next iteration of the podcast is actually to see what you've been hearing about.
Yeah.
And then the more we got into the podcast, the more I saw that really, you know, we've turned it more into a travel show. It's a travel show. What's the, like everything I just told you about Australia, right? So we filmed all that. That's all the fun
Mhm.
stuff. And then we show you, did you know that there's a public transit system in the city of, Barcelona or the city of wherever, and you can use that system to actually get around. You don't have to rent a car. You don't have to Ubers all the time. you actually might find out more about the city and its local culture by getting on their local public transit system. But sometimes it's kind of hard to figure out, well, how do I do that? So I've got a segment of my show called How Do I Get There? And
That's
every
awesome.
city we go to, I ask the local guy, like there, let's go back to Brisbane. They've got, cool, man, 26 ferries, that go across the water because it's a river city. So I said, well, let's use that as a how do I get there segment. So I talked to the head guy who runs them. Who's actually he's president of the city council transportation committee, and we rode one, and then we did a little segment. So I want to ride from downtown Brisbane to get over to the docks over here where there's lots of restaurants and stuff under the main bridge. But how do I get there? And he says, well, this is what you do. You come here, you get on here. This is how you pay for it. It's a credit card. You tap and go or whatever it is. And then if you watch that, you're like, that's how it works. Like I remember one time we were in Florida. My wife said to me, I was gone with the car. I had a rental car. I was working. So she was there with our daughter. And when I got back, she's like, Paul, I would have ridden the bus. There's a bus right outside a hotel, but I didn't know when it comes or where it goes or how often.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, that's a real problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
For the uninitiated who don't know about that local system. So I've been encouraging transit systems across the country, and they're doing it now, to put on QR codes on each bus stop sign. And you just put your phone on that, and it takes you to the website of the transit agency, and it says, okay, you're on the number 9 line. The bus comes every 15 minutes, and here's where it comes from and goes to. That's all a rider needs, for an average person. And most systems now will accept, what they call tap and go credit cards. So you can either pay your cash when you get on, but a lot of people are trying to move away from cash. Just tap your credit card, man. You don't need any kind of special card in most systems. And that's the same way all across the world. So that's what the show is, Ross. It's mixing food, fun, culture, all the things I love and travel in with transportation. And we take you behind the scenes and kind of show you cool things. Like when we were in Brisbane, they took us down underneath the city, underneath the river, where they're digging a big subway tunnel underneath there. And so we got to see that, before anybody else does. And we show it to you. And the guy explains, here's how we build it. I think that stuff's interesting to people. At least it is to me. So
It is. It is. And I mean, I can hear and see the passion that you have for it. I think you got to bring back, before I lose my train of thought on
yeah.
this, Comfort's Corner. I think that's that's sticky. I grown up and just throughout my life, we're all about alliterations, and it's like sometimes that's the most catchy stuff that you're like, wow, that's
Yeah.
that's impressive. But what you're talking about is super important, because the biggest challenge that I see for people is it's not, sometimes it's okay, how do I get the flight? It's more the logistics of what do I do when I get there? Like if obviously I've done it for a while going over outside of the US, even within the US, but there people who haven't are hesitant of thinking, well, if I'm going to, let's just say Spain, I don't know how to speak Spanish. I don't know how to read that.
Yeah.
How do I then, like, what are the steps and processes? So you're solving for a huge challenge. And for me, like being experienced, and I mean, one of the reasons I started this was like you were talking about, passion meets destiny. I mean, I was planning trips of our groups of friends over to Europe, annual snowboarding trips all over North America, surprising my now fiance with trips every, Christmas, birthday, to go different places, which got her to travel more. And just that person that everyone went to ask, hey, where do I go? What do I do? What are the best credit cards? How do I save money? What do I do here? What are the biggest challenges? Like every possible question. And that's why I started this, to help guide people down that path. And I wish 10 years ago there were tools like there are now, like ChatGPT 4.0, Perplexity, where you can ask some of those questions and it will give you, if I'm going through customs in Canada and I have a quick layover, right? Like what do I need to grab out of my bag? Do I need to have this ready? Like being able to ask those and have those all set out in front of you. I mean, those help. And that's one thing I help teach people is how to leverage those AI tools. So if you are one of those people that wants to do it on your own, you can. Now we have the resources. If you're like, hey, I just need a travel agent to do it, I don't want to, but there's just people seeing how many valuable assets there are out there, whether it's your YouTube, whether it's someone else's around, food. And I loved what you talked about when you were like, yeah, when we first spoke, you were like, yeah, I'm the Anthony Bourdain behind the scenes for travel and public transportation. I think that's so cool. And it is helpful in what you said. How do I get there? Like that's the first thing I'm thinking of and the question I'm asking. So
Yeah.
it's definitely something that's helpful. And I encourage my audience who's listening, go check out Paul's YouTube channel, his social media, just from a month and a half of following and being connected, it's been extremely helpful for me when I'm looking at other places. So when we go
It's
to
interesting.
Australia, I'm gonna have to I gotta
Yeah.
I gotta get your itinerary. I gotta get all the behind the scenes and go listen to the podcast and watch the YouTube.
Yeah, our shows that are coming up for people, if they're interested, we do one TV show a month. It's a lot of work to put together a show. We've won a bunch of awards. I got them over my corner shoulder here, but we won the Communicator Award this year and the World Wide Web Awards for our videos. Um, Specifically on the travel side, the shows that won the episodes were the Rocky Mountaineer episode, which is a excursion train in Canada and in Denver. Encourage people to try that out too. But um, December show, they dropped the second week of the month, second Thursday, is in Fairbanks, Alaska. Great show. We can talk about Fairbanks in a minute. One of my favorite locations of all time that I visited. And then in January would be the Melbourne and Tasmania episode. And in February will be the Brisbane episode. So they're about 19, 18 minutes long. We keep them under 20 if we can. That's what people seem to, we could see on YouTube when everybody starts dropping off, around 18, 19 minutes. It's just like half the audience drops no matter what's on. It's
Yeah.
hilarious. We could save the best stuff till last. But, one thing I was going to mention, Ross, about when you go to a city, I don't know how you find this, but I like to ride those red top open bus tour things, hop on, hop off bus tours. If I go to a brand new city, if I have time,
Yeah.
sometimes I have a busy schedule and I can't do it, but it's a great way to explore a city. I remember when I went to Chicago a few years ago, and I had some time. I had an afternoon, so in between meetings, so I took the red top hop. I don't know what they call it. It's not red top, but whatever it is. It's the hop on, hop off tours in these cities, where they take you around to all the interesting sites. And it was so amazing. I thought I knew a lot about Chicago, but I was able to find out all kinds of interesting things. And while I was on the bus, the guy mentioned a book called, Devil in the White City. And it was a book by this guy all about the 1893 World's Fair that came to Chicago and the mystery behind it. There was a mass murderer who was killing women when they came into the city. It was all in the backdrop of building the White City, they called it. It was a white gleaming city they built, and then they tore it all down after. Ridiculous how they do these world fairs back in the day. But it got me into like a 6 month wormhole of digging into Chicago's history and finding these, going on these mystery tours online. They even have mystery tours online you can go to, and just exploring a region and it becoming fascinating. I mean, for those who are interested in art, I find the Chicago Museum of Art to be the best museum I've ever gone to in my life for the masters that are there, the Renoirs and the Van Goghs and all the great art, even the ones that you saw on Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where they go on that tour of the
Yeah.
Chicago Museum of Art. And I got a picture of me standing right in front of that big picture that he was standing at, with his girlfriend Mallory, whatever her name was. So it's just to me, that red top, the open top tours are a great way, and you put on the headphones, listen to the person in your language, and it's a great way to kind of then say, okay, now I'm going to go back and say these six things.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. And I feel like when you do go somewhere and you start to learn something about it, like you mentioned with Chicago, like that's then you start going down a wormhole. And that's something too that people who I try to help people who haven't traveled. Obviously, we travel a bunch, but people who haven't or are starting or wanting to travel more, like you gain some of those experiences that you're not going to get when you go to just say, oh, I'm just going to go to the Bahamas or somewhere on an all
Yeah,
inclusive. I'm going to go sit on the beach and relax. Like that's great, but you don't get some of those different experiences that teach you a lot about not only life, but yourself if you aren't going to different countries and having those different types of experiences. Cause then you learn something, you learn a new book, you meet different people, right? So no, that's couldn't agree more.
yeah.
It's well said.
And travel itself, I think, I think it was Anthony Bourdain that talked about, the journey, it can be the destination. You don't have to have like, I'm going to go there and just sit on a beach for a week. Why don't you explore? Why
Hmm.
don't you make the journey your
Yeah.
destination? And so I think that's what your show and your service does for people is help them explore an area. You know, Let me tell you, I've been to, I think, 45 US states and probably now, I don't know, 18 countries or something like that. And it's a whole different world out there. It's not like your home.
Yeah.
I mean, there's similarities. Like there's a city in Miami, like I mentioned to you, Miami, Brisbane, that looks just like Miami, Florida. I mean, I couldn't
Yep.
believe how much it was like it, just like it. And my camera guy Jaime is from that area. He's like, I feel like I'm home. And So, but isn't that interesting? And then you could explore some and say, wow, what is this all about? I mean, there's cities in China, they say, that are replicas of cities like Rome and Paris and stuff like that. So I've never been to any of those, although I've been to Shanghai and ridden the 300 mile per hour maglev train about 10 years ago. That was pretty cool. So there's lots of different fun experiences. To me, that's the richness and the texture of life comes from, doing these trips and living their life. And that doesn't come through just the average tour. It comes from really digging in.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I think when you talk about Anthony Bourdain, you talk about his like that type of lifestyle. When you first started just traveling around and doing like public transportation and just focusing on that and then
Yeah.
kind of transitioning into the show and then just doing something behind the scenes, going to different cities, trying different food, like how do you feel like that's really impacted and like elevated your travel game versus just prior when it was maybe just going there for work?
Yeah. The good thing is I normally have, we to produce a show, which I'm the producer as well as the host, it takes a lot of preparation. So we do, dozens of calls. We talk to we're going to Halifax, right? A little bit ago, Halifax, Canada. So we call Visit Halifax and we talk to the head there and I tell her what we're doing and she says, great, here's the things you ought to go see. Did you know that this is where most of the bodies are buried from the Titanic? I was like, no, I didn't know that.
Wow.
There's three cemeteries there, and one of them in particular has like 123 bodies. And we were the place where the rescue came out of this. They sent these boats out from here and all this. So suddenly, I've become fascinated with this whole. They have a museum and all this stuff. And so, yeah, I think that kind of that exploration and finding out things that you're already interested in and the connection points in that city are what makes it special and what makes it unique. I mean, while we're there, I talk to the transit people ahead of time and I say, where's some of the most unique restaurants? Where's some of the most unique places? But sometimes, man, they just happen by accident.
Yeah.
So for instance, we're in LA a couple months ago, Los Angeles. We're filming an episode, which is live right now on our channel, about how the city is preparing for the Olympics. And they want to be, Mayor Bass has said they want to be the first car-free, transit-first Olympics, meaning they don't want people driving up and parking their cars at the venues. They want them to, do park and rides or stay at home and ride transit bikes, etc. So we're talking to all the top transit leaders. Since I'm the former CEO of a transit system and have been in the transit for 30 years, it's usually not difficult for me to get a hold of the right people, and then they help us set it up. But sometimes, we come into things so we were there for 3 nights. We don't have any plans all 3 nights. So we're just what we know we wanted to film, for instance, this one spot. We wanted to film an opening to the show while I'm walking on the Walk of Stars, and the line was going to be, here we're walking on Hollywood stars, but we're going to show you the real stars of LA, the ones that are making the city move. So we film that. That takes, 20 minutes and then we're done. And then we're just walking. And it's kind of run down on that street now to me. A lot of boarded up buildings, a lot of, urine and smell of weed everywhere and all that. So we're just walking along. I'm like, wow, man, this is wild. And then we come across this restaurant and it looks unique from the outside. And I'm like, I think it's where we should go eat tonight. Well, it turns out it's the oldest restaurant in Hollywood, and Hollywood was built around it. This is where Frank Sinatra went and all these guys, And so, they come out with the red velvet, jackets, the waiters and the maitre d's do. And just a phenomenal experience, that you never would have gotten if you hadn't explored. The next night, my guy Jaime likes to go see music. So he finds this place called Vibrato Grill, which is up in the hills. And it's owned by, the guy that started A&M Records. Remember Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. Those of us who are over 40 years old remember his, he had jazz music. So this guy became a billionaire. He's 92 years old. He still travels, still tours, but he spent, millions of dollars building this amazing facility on top of a hill with, I wouldn't say it's 5-star food because I don't think they have 5 stars there, but it's amazing food and amazing music. It's something we never would have. Probably the best music we've heard in the last 3 years was at that grill, Vibrato Grill. And it's something that was completely unplanned. We just explored, opened it up. And we can't always film these things, because like that, you can't always film there. We just maybe do a 2-second clip. But the experiences you have while you're traveling a show like this live with you for a long time. The other thing I was going to mention was you also can't go back, in my opinion. It's very interesting. I remember when I first started traveling, oh man, I got to bring my wife and kids here. And sometimes they come with me on those trips, but usually not. But it's never going to be the same for me. The experience is the first time you're there. is when
Yeah.
it's amazing, and you're like, yeah, I'd love to share this with my loved ones. Well, bring them with you on the first time you go there
Yeah.
because it will never be the same. You're not going to have the shared sense of awe and wonder you have when you look at the Grand Canyon for the first time. You
Yep.
bring your kids after you've been there 3 times. You're like, hey, kids, look, isn't this great? But if you all experience it together, that is phenomenal. I remember this was before the TV show, before all this. I remember one time I did one of those bucket list trips with my kids, and I was like, all right, I'm going to go from Vegas to LA and we're going to drive down the coast and see every beach and stop in San Diego. Go to the zoo, which everybody says is so great there. What do you want to do? Everybody came up with their list of what they wanted to do, So I wanted to take them to a Carrot Top show. I love Carrot Top, the
Yeah.
comedian. And, you can go to that when you're under 18. So we started there and we took them to the Grand Canyon and we rented a real fast car and drove across the desert real fast and saw all that happening. And then, went to Hollywood, went to the Hollywood sign, and did all the fun stuff there and then drove down the coast, stopping at every beach, taking, a couple hours at every beach with the kids, just swimming and having fun. And then ended up in San Diego where we went around to the island there and saw the zoo. And also these unexplored areas, when you do them with your family, and this sounds like what your company helps people do, is set up an amazing experience for yourself and your loved ones so that you can share it together. And they really are lifelong memories. We still talk about it. That was over a decade ago. My kids still bring it up.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's the biggest thing is and I try to go different places each time. I don't like I'm
Yeah.
going back to it's not every year we're going to Myrtle Beach, just something like that. It's like that's kind of the lazy way out. It's like picking a new destination. I think we're going to Turks and Caicos in 2 weeks for my birthday, but this is like one of the first times we're going back to somewhere just because we were able to get a pretty much a free flight on points and then found a very cheap stay and we've been, so it's pretty easy it's already mapped out. But yeah, I think a lot of those different memories are created. When you bring up Grand Canyon, like that's one of the things that sticks out to me is when we went there, we did the Four Corners, we drove through, my dad got sick. It was the heat of the summer because it was summer vacation. I just showed up because I was like 8 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
but but then I went back again with some friends and I was like, oh, there's the Grand Canyon, but it wasn't the same. And then we just actually went back last year and like it was my fiance's first time seeing it for me. I was like, okay, cool. I've been here. So no, that's a great point. But I mean, that's where I try to help
Yeah.
people plan their own trips because it isn't that hard. It's just being able to know where to start, how to do it, and like
Yeah.
what tools to leverage. And I've made the mistakes from planning trips over 10 years. Lessons learned, right? Compiled all the things that you don't want to do, what you don't want to bring. How do you travel comfortably? I think that's huge from from a transit perspective too. Like if you're flying and you haven't flown, overnight, I mean a red eye or just flying over to Europe or anywhere else, like you want to make sure that you have a comfortable pillow. You want to make sure you have compression socks. You want to make sure, right? You have an eye mask. You want to make sure you have headphones that are noise cancellation. So a lot of
Yes.
just like those are just a couple little things, but over time you find out real quick, like, oh, this is something that I learned. Maybe I don't bring a check bag for a 5-day trip because it might get lost and then I'm going to have to wait at a layover. And then, so it's just little things like
Yeah.
that.
I
So
call it I call it becoming a hostage to your
yeah.
suitcase. That's what happens, man. Like if
Yeah.
you got to switch, you
Yep.
can't because it's already loaded on the plane.
Hmm.
But I travel heavy, so I almost always have a bag, and I've just had become hostage to it. But you're right. I just took a 23-hour flight back from Australia, and all those things you mentioned, that's what I had, and it made the trip so much more enjoyable. I told everybody they're like, oh, that's terrible. I said, you know what? I love the trip. I could
Yeah.
do I could do a 40-hour plane trip because I'm sitting in a comfortable chair. I got, one level up, not, I like having the extra 2 inches for your knees or whatever.
Oh,
So
yeah.
a little, on a longer trip, what do they call it? Economy plus or something like that.
Yep.
I can't afford to do first class or business class, but we can do economy plus. And yeah, how could it be any better? You're sitting, you got your music on or whatever you want, watch some movies, do some work, on your phone or your lap, hook into the internet. You can do that. People are coming and serving you food and drinks the whole time
Yep.
you're on there. I
Yep.
mean, to me, I love flying. And
Yeah.
I love the feeling of the takeoff where you feel the pressure. I love that for some reason. And I love the feeling of the landing.
Yep.
And, if you keep your nasal passages clear. Maybe you take a pill which does that, or just use some Afrin so you clear your head off before you fly. For me, then I don't have my ears popping all the time when I get down. I don't have that, which I had a lot when I first started traveling. I didn't understand that. Finally, a doctor explained, yeah, you got to take a Claritin D or something before you go up, and it'll
Yeah.
just clear out your sinuses. And then when you land, your ears aren't popping for the next 2 days. So little tricks like that are important, right?
Yeah, 100%. And that's a word when we go over to Thailand and Bali and we have one of those 24-hour flights, we instead of using, I mean, we are big into the points and miles game of how do we right
Yeah.
leverage our points and then use airline transfer partners to save big so we can fly. So when we were going to Greece this past September, we had to decide, hey, let's not use the points on business class going there. Let's use them so we can go to and from and the fly down lie seats on Qatar Q
Oh,
suites because
nice.
that's like the top one that I've so we were just kind of how do we strategically stack those between the different transfer partners and rewards programs that we have through the different credit card companies. And yeah, but I think just even that extra leg room, that's something we did when we went to Greece. And I mean, it is, and making sure too, you're drinking a lot of water because I think people that's something that people may not do. And you start to realize when you fly and you fly for a long time. And I feel like before this year, I never realized it. Maybe, I mean, I'm just getting a little older, but starting to drink more water, having maybe it's
Absolutely.
hydration, packs, and also standing and walking. Like I would
Yes.
have like every hour and a half, unless I'm dead
Just get up,
asleep.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, get up, drink water, and it used and pay a little bit extra for that extra leg room because it definitely goes a long way.
Yeah. 100% on the water. I've always done this and still do it. You either bring, like I've got here, my glass bottle that I can refill. They let you do that, in these days in airports. But always have a bottle of water with you when you get on the plane, because it could be a half hour or it could be a bumpy flight and they never serve and
Yep.
you're stuck there. So, yeah, I do. For me personally, if it's a flight of under an hour and a half, 2 hours, I like the aisle seat so I can get up easily. I'm not going to try to sleep. It's not that big of a deal. If it's a longer, three or longer hour, I like the window so I can lean against the window with a pillow and see if I
Yeah.
can doze off or whatever, relax. Just kind of like, that's my personal tips. One thing I was going to mention about food too, while we're talking about it, is I would encourage you to try to eat some local food when you go on these places. Don't just go to fast food or a restaurant that's a steakhouse that you're familiar with. I mean, what do you do, Ross? Do you try to eat the local food when you go there?
Oh, that's our favorite part about traveling. And that's
Yeah,
like we won't do all inclusive just because my favorite part is trying the different types of food, figuring out where are the top restaurants that the locals recommend.
yeah,
Usually I'll go on whether it's leveraging TripAdvisor, Perplexity, and just finding some of those top ones, but also reading different blogs, Reddit, and then leaving, depending on if we're in a city for 4 days, leaving a full day or almost a day and a half. And then when we go to some of those top restaurants, always asking the waiter, bartenders, like, hey guys, here's what we kind of were looking at, but what do you recommend? And a lot of the times they're like, oh, all those are good, but here's a spot. Like, what do you guys like to do? And they'll say, okay, based on that, go try this. It'd be the same if I was coming up to Annapolis
yeah.
and you would tell me, and if you were coming to Charlotte, I'd be like, hey, this is what I recommend, depending on.
Yep.
So it's just like, doing your research prior, because if you do want to get reservations at a good restaurant, right? If there's something that you really want and it's like, hey, you got to go to this place that you read online, like you definitely want to do that because it'll book out. But for other stuff, I always recommend asking the locals and also understanding what are the must try dishes and trying those because
Oh,
sometimes
yeah.
that's the most important thing and not trying food. I think that's the biggest mistake. And we had a friend when we went to Croatia. He's a big just French fries, pizza, and salad
Yeah.
guy. And we had fresh fish walking up off the sea, and he tried it.
Yeah.
It's like this is amazing. And I'm
Yeah.
like, dude, you haven't even been west of Ohio, and now you're sitting in Croatia and fish coming up off the sea. So I recommend trying it. And if you're going somewhere like Bali, Thailand, where you're like, okay, I don't want to get Bali belly. I don't want like if I eat street food, right?
Yeah.
Preparing, understanding, okay, what are the things that I need to do, taking probiotics, doing a lot of that.
That's
A lot of
good.
the time, that it's really preparation rather than just showing up and being, I mean, that's the biggest thing that comes into it, right? Is sometimes if you're unprepared, you're gonna be overwhelmed and you're not gonna have a good trip. So just planning ahead and understanding what you like and just trying it. That's my biggest piece of advice. Why I always recommend people, you know, it, my bias is don't do all inclusive. That's just kind of the lazy way out.
Yeah.
Get a vacation where you can experience everything and gain a lot of that.
I like that. That's good. My wife and I are going to Delray Beach this between Christmas and New Year's in Florida to get out of the cold here in Maryland. And so we're already looking at, she's already looking at all the restaurants there. And we're going to pick out every morning. We're going to go on a walk and we're going to walk down to the main drag there, Atlantic Avenue, and have a different place for breakfast every day we're there. And try what's, that's what makes, that's part of the if you want to have a fun travel experience, or
Yeah.
you're not just, you or even if you're not, even if you're going, like for instance, I want to go see the Eagles play, the band they're playing at the Sphere. Like I saw U2 at the Sphere this last year with my son.
That's
Just fantastic, by the way. If you're a music fan, you've got to see your favorite band when they play at the Sphere. It's
We
just
had friends who just went. So they're, since all of them are from Ohio, they went out for the Browns. Browns are playing in Vegas and the Eagles are playing at the Sphere. And
there
they
you
said it was,
did they say it was
they,
good?
yeah, they said it was great. And I saw the Dead just got their residency back for next year. So
Okay.
if we go out to Vegas, I'm next time I go out. When I was out there last year for work, there was no one was playing, which I was kind of bummed. It had just
Yeah,
opened up, and
yeah.
I think I had just seen you two
Yes.
open up. Did you go to the first one, or which one did
No,
you
I
go
didn't make it
to?
to the first one. My friend who runs the local transit system there, MJ, she got to go and she said, "Paul, it's amazing. You got to go." So I did it as a separate trip. My son and I, spent big money and flew there and spent the night. The tickets are always expensive there, but it's hopefully for me not a once in a lifetime experience, but just to let people know about it. It's this big like semi dome, and you there's no speakers on the stage. The whole inside is a speaker system. And it's an amazing light show, which goes all the way up to the top of the ceiling in front of you behind the band that's playing. And I'm telling you, it literally sounded like Bono was sitting right next to me singing in my ear. So they're way down there. I couldn't afford the tickets way down. They're like $1,200 or something. So these were in the hundreds, but not that much. But they're up, on the fourth level. But they're up on the screen. They're bigger than life on the screen in front of you. And the music sound was not diminished by our location in the venue because the whole building is a built-in speaker system. Just an experience you'll always remember. It's just phenomenal. But anyway, yeah. So even when you go to a place like that, don't just think of that as the only thing that you can experience there. That's what I was going to say. Okay, now you've got your main thing, right? All right, we're going to
Yep.
go see the Eagles. Now, what else are we going to do? Well, I don't want to just eat at the Chipotle that's outside on my way in. Why don't we actually plan on going someplace cool and eating for, an hour before the show? And then where do we want to stay? When I go to Vegas personally, I try to stay in a different hotel on the Strip every single time. I want to experience it all. So you're in the one that looks like a pyramid, or you're in the New York, New York, or the Paris, or
Yep.
whatever. Everyone has their own vibe. Of course, they all want you to gamble. I
Yeah.
try not to get sucked into that too much, but
Yeah.
unless you have a limit, $200, that's all I'm going to spend, and if I lose it in 5 minutes or 2 hours, that's
Yeah.
it. Got to be careful about yourself. But yeah, I would say, try to maximize your experience in these locations. And again, on the transit side, one way to look at, like for instance, Las Vegas has an amazing bus system that's right on the strip. You can ride. A lot of the cities have, you ride $5 all day or something like that. Man, you could spend 100 to $200 on Uber trips,
Yeah.
or you can ride the bus. And then a lot of these cities, they're running high frequencies, so you don't have to sit there and wait and wonder. You can just take a quick look on their website. The local transit system, Las Vegas. Well, it's called the RTC, regional transit, and routes. And here, okay, there's a route here. It runs every 5 minutes, all day long on the strip or whatever. I can just get on that. And
Yeah.
you can get a multi-use card at a ticket vending machine. You just tap and go all day for $5, whatever. So think about adding in public transportation in your experience into a city. Again, it's an additional layer of fun and newness, something that you haven't done before. And they have double-decker buses there. That's pretty cool.
Yep.
Normally, you don't get to experience that anywhere except London. There's all kinds of fun things in different cities in their transit system, if you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like in Europe, every time I've gone over,
Oh
we've leveraged
yeah.
public transportation because that's the, I mean, if not, it's the easiest, cheapest way to get around. And like it's super simple.
Yeah.
And I think people don't, when a lot of people go over there who haven't traveled are just like, well, I don't want to use that. That's right. I'd rather Uber, but you can save a lot of money. And that's very interesting about Las Vegas. Like, I didn't know. I mean, every time I've
Yeah.
stayed on the strip and just can walk, but
Right.
it'd be good to know too, like, are there specific apps or like best practices, I
Yeah.
guess, within the US for people? And
Yes.
then also just like in Europe or just any other regions around the world. I know you talked about Australia, but anything else that, could be
Yeah.
helpful.
Most cities have an app, but a lot of them also you can do it just on Google Transit. You go Google and they have their own travel app. You can even go on Google Maps, and a lot of places it gives you the option. Okay, you can walk, you can bike, you can do it, or you push the bus, and it'll tell you when the bus is coming. I mean, it's very simple. If I won't say it's very simple, but it's simple enough that you could probably figure it out without a lot of effort.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. Okay, it goes here, there, whatever. Yeah. So and a lot of times there'll be apps which will also tell you when the next bus is coming. So you don't, and you can do that on Google as well. There's an app called the Transit app that a lot of cities across the world have that is free to use, and most of them are free, obviously. Yeah, so it's a good way to kind of explore a city. I think like you said, Europe really knows how to do transit really well. I'm actually, Ross, thinking about doing we're actually planning, not just thinking about it, but planning on doing a documentary movie next year on what's wrong with transit America. Because you go to Hong Kong. I got a friend of mine that runs buses in Hong Kong. He told me 90% of the people in Hong Kong use transit. You go to London, it's 40 to 50%. You go to America, outside of New York City, it's 5%. Only 5% of Americans ever use transit. It's kind of viewed as buses are for local people going to work, maybe poor
Hmm.
people going to social services. No, they're for everyone. And you can ride them. I mean, when you go into Washington, D.C., most people know, oh, I'm going to use the metro.
Yep.
I don't want to try to go downtown and try to park. So that is a little bit different. But buses, a lot of people don't think of them as sexy or fun, but they can be, and they are. And cities are doing things. That's what our show shows. Watch if you're doing this right now, if you're listening to Ross's show, just go to Transit Unplugged TV on YouTube. Pick a city that you want to say, oh, I might like to go to Tulsa, or I might like to go to Kansas City, or LA, or Miami. And just click that episode. It's fun, it's interesting, and it'll also show you their public transportation system. When you're done, it may give you an idea about, okay, you know what? For instance, when I'm in Vegas, last time we were there, we went down to Fremont Street, right? I like Fremont Street. It's fun. It's a place where it's like old Las Vegas. And you can play $5 blackjack there. You can't play $5 blackjack anywhere else in
Old
Vegas.
Vegas is where to go if you want to
Yeah, yeah.
gamble.
So, but the taxi ride was I don't remember, but it was like 25 bucks. So if I'd have taken 5 minutes, I'm the transit guy, and planned it, I could have gotten on a bus and gotten down there, but I didn't. So even my own self, I need to learn myself that, but or teach myself that lesson. But yeah, you can if you just take a little bit of preparation, and you're not like you're walking out like, oh, just jump in the cab.
Yeah.
No, think about getting on transit. It'll save you a lot of money, and it could be a great experience. Something that opens up your eyes, like I told you about my trip to Chicago was.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%. And Google Maps is definitely that's what I use when I'm looking if we're in Europe or if we're somewhere and just seeing like getting off, right? What's the difference between a cab and what's going to be the difference between taking transit, right? If
Yeah,
it's like a 15-30 minute difference and it's a little bit, then sometimes I'll take an Uber if it's coming off an 8 hour flight and I'm just like, I just want to get there, paying for
yeah,
convenience. But I do think it is like when we would travel with groups, we would always take public transit because we had 6 people and it was just easy. So you get off and like
yeah.
most of those guys had will never or hadn't experienced any sort of transit in Europe. So taking the tube in London to them was like, what the hell is this? This is
Yeah,
wild.
yeah,
Like they're getting in and
yeah.
but then taking all those and then also like I just remember clearly because they had never traveled being like, oh, we can take the train from Madrid to Barcelona. And oh, yeah, you're pretty much sitting in first class. Like it's super
Exactly, man.
comfortable.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And if you want to take a longer train overnight, and you just want to sleep, like a lot of the times, even if it's 8, 9 hours, like you're paying pennies on the dollar
that's
and
right.
it's super comfortable. So yeah,
Yeah,
but I love that idea because that's something that I always think about is, and that statistic is surprising, but it's not.
yep.
That's the exact like persona of what most people think travelers who travel on public transit in the US are, but that's 90% over there in China. That's not shocking.
No, no. Last thing I want to mention about that is just to reiterate what you said. almost every city in the world has train service from the airport into the city. I mean, even Baltimore, where I used to run the transit system, we had light rail service right into the airport. So
Hmm.
even if you don't use transit anywhere else, dude, don't pay $80 for an Uber, right?
Yeah.
Or a taxi cab to get into the city. Just get on the light rail vehicle or the tram vehicle. It's easy to figure out. They make it very easy for travelers, and it'll take you to the downtown center part of the city. There
Hmm.
you can then, if you need to get a cab for what they call the last mile solution, grab a cab or an Uber from the hub you'll save big money. I mean, you can buy dinner
Yeah.
tonight on what you just saved in a lot of cases. Um, and then, like you said, the overnight train. I just want to mention, man, I went on the night jet train. It's the episode 2 months ago. I mean, these are all still on our YouTube page, but it's the Hamburg to Vienna night jet train, and it's run by a company called OBB. Over there, they have a lot of private companies that have contracts with the government to run things, and it's an amazing trip. You get on the train at in Hamburg at the train station, and you get to sleep in the car. I explain it all to you exactly how to do it. Even when you get in the car, I explain everything about here's where the light is. Here's how you could take a shower in the room. Here's how you do it in the bathroom. The floor drains it out. I tried it. It's cool. I wanted to experience it all. Here's how you order your food. It might be in German, but I can show you how to figure that out.
That's
So,
cool.
um, so anyway, yeah. So taking an overnight train instead of an airplane is an amazing way to experience. And man, you're laying there, you're looking out the window. To me, I love trains. As
Yeah.
the countryside is going by, as you fall asleep, the train is gently rocking you to sleep. I mean, it's phenomenal.
Well, and yeah, and if you're thinking about your trip, you get an extra day in that one city,
That's right.
and you aren't having to be like, okay, I gotta get to, if you have a midday flight, get there,
Yeah,
check in. I have a half day.
that's right.
And we actually, when we were in, and I didn't know from in Thailand how the train system is, but we had I think it was a 12-hour drive. So we ended up just taking a flight. We're flying out at 8:30, but sometimes there's different ways to line that up so you maximize time. You sleep in the train, it's comfortable. It's not like you're sitting in a middle seat on an airplane
That's
flying over,
right. You
right?
got it.
Yeah. So well, cool. Well, I know, we want to wrap up, but I think I always like to ask, right? Like, what's one piece of advice for travelers who, if they're well traveled, if they're just starting out when they're going to a city, around public transportation, food, culture, kind of anything that you
Yeah.
give?
Yeah. So, I would say if you go to a new city, like the one thing I mentioned is if you have time, if you have 2 hours, take the ride around the town, hop on, hop off bus tour. You go to Nashville, go to any city, it's a great way to get the lay of the land. Jump off and explore. They have another guy coming right behind you in the next bus, and a half hour later, jump. That's one hint. Number two would be try to find some great local music. Music is fun, man, and go explore ahead of time. Where do you want jazz? Do you want pop? Do you want rock? Do you want Latin? Whatever you want, figure out ahead of time and plan to go and see some music. And lastly, would be what you and I just talked about, the food, fun, and culture. Get the food, get the local food. Look ahead of time. This is something you don't necessarily want to wait till the last minute on. If you want to get some good local food, if you're in you know, don't order crab cakes in Kansas City. Don't order seafood, right? It's not a coastal city near the water. That's a general piece of advice I would offer you. If you're in a steak city, if you're in Fort Worth, Texas, get a steak.
Yep.
If you're in where I was at, on the coast of Australia, then get their local tuna, get their local whatever. Get what's fresh and local to that area, but plan it ahead of time. That's what I would suggest.
Always. Yeah. No, I think it just goes back to planning ahead of time. And one other thing to add, if you are going somewhere and you're looking at music events, right? I think that's find that you said it best. Find that if you have one big event, plan around that because sometimes that could be the main reason for your trip, but then find other things that might be happening in the city as well. Well, cool,
Yeah,
man.
man.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. I learned a ton. I'm excited for my audience to learn. If you guys want to go give Paul a follow at Transit Unplugged TV on YouTube. Also, I know you have, is it that the same on all your other socials?
Yeah, I mean, transitunplugged.com is our website.
Okay.
And if you're interested in following me on LinkedIn, that's the main place I post. I have 25,000 followers on LinkedIn. Just find Paul Comfort. I'm also on Instagram, where I do more of the food and fun stuff on Instagram, videos of me playing piano in a downtown train station or whatever. That's at Paul W. Comfort on Instagram.
Awesome. Well, I'll share all those in the show notes. And if you guys give Paul a follow. I mean, he brings a ton of value, has a ton of experience. And if you're in Charlotte, you got to let me know. And if I'm up in your neck of the woods in Annapolis, I'll have to let you know. Or if we're in different places around the world and
Yeah.
we want to link up.
There
So
you go.
I appreciate you coming on. Looking forward to talking soon. Have a good one.
Thanks, brother.